The courtroom buzzed with a tense energy, a mixture of nervous anticipation and the quiet hum of whispered conversations. Lawyers shuffled papers, some tapping pens against the polished wooden benches, while clerks moved briskly to deliver documents to the judge. The judge himself sat at the elevated bench, reviewing his notes, occasionally adjusting his glasses, his expression serious but thoughtful. The walls of the courtroom seemed to close in with the weight of importance, lined with tall bookshelves, flags, and portraits that reminded everyone that justice was the anchor of the room. The air smelled faintly of old wood and freshly printed legal documents. Amid this atmosphere of adult seriousness, a small figure sat on a wide wooden bench near the gallery. 3-year-old Emma clutched a worn stuffed bunny tightly to her chest, her tiny fingers gripping the fur as if it could protect her from the formalities surrounding her. Her big brown eyes darted back and forth, absorbing everything she could. She didn't understand much about the trial or the accusations being discussed. The words theft, witness, and testimony floated over her ears in a confusing blur. But she could feel the weight of the room, the stiff posture of the adults, the whispered comments, and the quiet tension that seemed to cling to the air like a heavy curtain. Emma's mother, Sarah, tried to keep her daughter calm, gently patting her back and whispering comforting words. "It's okay, sweetie. Just sit here with me," she murmured, though her eyes flicked nervously toward the judge and the lawyers. Sarah had never imagined bringing a child into such a serious setting, but circumstances left her little choice. The case involved a local incident that Sarah had been asked to observe, and she couldn't leave Emma behind. She tried to distract Emma by pointing at the American flag or talking about the sun shining outside, but the child's attention wandered constantly, restless in the rigid environment. The gallery was filling steadily. Reporters with cameras in hand squeezed between benches, murmuring quietly as they prepared for the next session. On the front row, a few law enforcement officers stood at attention, their polished shoes tapping lightly against the floor. Some visitors glanced at Emma and her mother, noting the contrast of innocence against the serious, adult-oriented environment. A few smiled knowingly at the little girl, remembering their own childhoods and the feeling of being small and out of place among towering adults and heavy responsibilities. Suddenly, a ripple of attention swept through the courtroom. The double doors at the far end of the room swung open, and a large police dog walked in beside its handler. The dog moved with precise control, muscles taut but flowing gracefully, its ears alert, and eyes scanning the room with the intelligence and awareness of a trained K9. Every person in the room seemed to notice the presence immediately. The officers straightened, lawyers paused mid-note, and reporters raised their cameras in unison. The courtroom grew still, a hush descending as all eyes turned toward the pair. Emma's reaction was immediate and unexpected. Her eyes widened and her tiny hand shot up, pointing directly at the dog with unshakable certainty. "There," she whispered to her mother, her voice filled with excitement and recognition. Sarah blinked, startled, unsure what had prompted this sudden outburst. She leaned closer to Emma, murmuring softly, "Do you know him?" But Emma's focus was unwavering, her gaze locked entirely on the dog and its handler. It was as if some memory, some connection, had awakened in her young mind, and nothing else existed in that moment. The officer handling the dog noticed the child's reaction as well. He knelt slightly to lower his height, his voice calm and gentle. "Hey there, little one. Do you know this dog?" he asked, unsure what to expect. Emma's finger remained pointed, trembling slightly with excitement, and she gave a small, confident nod. "He's the brave one," she said, her words innocent, simple, yet filled with certainty that seemed to leave an impression on everyone who heard her. A ripple of murmurs ran through the courtroom. Lawyers exchanged curious glances. The judge, adjusting his glasses, leaned forward slightly, intrigued by this unusual moment in what had otherwise been a strictly formal session. Even the other spectators, families waiting for the case to proceed, leaned forward, trying to understand why a tiny child could react so strongly to a working police dog. Cameras clicked, capturing the small, fleeting moment that already felt extraordinary. As the dog's tail twitched subtly and its ears flicked toward Emma, it became clear that recognition wasn't one-sided. The dog had sensed something in the child's presence, a past connection or a memory only animals can understand. Emma giggled softly, clapping her hands in delight, her voice ringing through the hushed room. The laughter, pure and untainted by courtroom seriousness, had an almost magical effect. Faces softened, tense shoulders relaxed, and for a fleeting moment the stern atmosphere gave way to warmth, curiosity, and awe. Sarah couldn't contain her emotions. She whispered to those near her, explaining that the dog had once comforted Emma during a thunderstorm at preschool months ago, calming the frightened little girl when she had cried uncontrollably. Witnesses nodded, touched by the story, as they understood the bond between a child and a dog could be profound and almost instinctive. Even the judge allowed a small, amused smile to creep across his face, the first sign of levity in what had been an intense morning. The courtroom now held more than legal proceedings. It held a scene of innocence, trust, and human-animal connection, unfolding right in the center of a serious environment. Emma's focus never wavered, and the dog remained calm, professional, yet unmistakably aware of her attention. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, sensing that this small child's recognition of a police dog might become more than a human interest anecdote. It might capture hearts nationwide. For Emma, the courtroom was no longer a place of adult rules and distant speeches. It had become a stage for something deeply personal, a reunion of sorts with a loyal, comforting presence she had forgotten in her busy little life. Her tiny hands, her wide eyes, her laughter, and her giggles had turned the courtroom into something extraordinary. A reminder that even in the most serious places, innocence and connection can break through, leaving a lasting impact on everyone who witnesses it. As the session continued, Sarah held Emma a little closer, watching her daughter's fascination. She understood this moment was special. Cameras continued to flash, officers adjusted their positions, but the room no longer felt strictly formal. It felt alive with emotion, curiosity, and subtle joy. Everyone who looked at Emma pointing at the police dog could feel the invisible thread connecting them, child and canine, past and present, innocence and training, all in one magical moment in a courtroom that no one present would ever forget. The heavy doors of the courtroom swung open, and all eyes instinctively turned. A tall K-9 officer entered first, his polished uniform crisp and commanding, but it was the animal beside him who captured everyone's attention. The police dog moved with a striking combination of strength and grace, its body coiled with trained energy, yet its calm eyes projected intelligence and attentiveness. The dog's ears flicked slightly as it scanned the room, taking in the benches, the judge, the lawyers, the reporters, and the spectators. Each step it took echoed softly on the polished floor, announcing its presence like a performer entering a stage. Emma's brown eyes widened immediately. Her tiny hand shot up, pointing directly at the massive canine. "There!" she exclaimed, her voice trembling slightly with excitement. Sarah, her mother, blinked in surprise, unsure if she should scold her daughter for speaking in the courtroom or simply observe. But the way Emma's gaze never wavered suggested that this was no ordinary reaction. It was recognition, instinctual and unmistakable. The courtroom fell silent, as though sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding before them. The K-9 officer paused mid-step, noticing the small girl pointing. He crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to Emma's eye level, his voice gentle. "Hey there, little one," he said. "Do you know this dog?" Emma's finger remained steady, unwavering. Her small lips curled into a smile as she whispered almost shyly, "He's the brave one." The courtroom murmured with soft chuckles and surprised whispers. The judge tilted his head, eyebrows raised, curious about this unusual moment. Lawyers exchanged glances, some smiling, others jotting down notes quietly. Even the officers at the front seemed momentarily distracted, captivated by the unexpected connection between child and dog. Emma's excitement grew as the dog moved a few steps closer, following the subtle guidance of its handler. its head tilted slightly, ears perking up as if acknowledging the tiny human's presence. Emma clapped her hands softly, giggling with delight. Her voice, filled with innocent joy, rang through the courtroom, cutting through the seriousness of the proceedings. "He remembers me," she said, more confidently this time. Her mother's eyes filled with tears, touched by the depth of the bond forming before her eyes. It was rare to witness such an immediate, instinctive connection, and even rarer in the highly controlled environment of a courtroom. The spectators leaned forward in their seats, their curiosity now fully piqued. "Does she know the dog?" whispered one woman. "I think she does," murmured another, captivated by the scene. The reporters, ever alert to a story, began adjusting their cameras and notebooks, sensing that this was more than a human interest moment. It had the potential to become a story that would capture hearts far beyond the courtroom walls. The dog, trained to react only on command, gave subtle signs of recognition. A slow wag of the tail, a gentle shift in posture, a soft, attentive gaze directed at the child. The officer guiding the dog whispered a few soft words, ensuring the animal remained calm, but there was no mistaking the subtle acknowledgement. The dog had known Emma before, and now, under the bright lights of the courtroom and the scrutiny of dozens of observers, it was showing quiet recognition. Emma reached out her tiny hand slightly, and though the dog remained disciplined, it shifted closer, leaning subtly toward her presence. The magic of the moment was tangible. A trained law enforcement dog responding to the instincts of a 3-year-old child. Sarah leaned closer to her daughter, whispering, "Do you remember him?" Emma nodded vigorously, her curls bouncing slightly. "He helped me. He made me feel safe," she exclaimed. Flashbacks flooded Sarah's mind. She remembered the day vividly. Emma had been terrified during a sudden thunderstorm at preschool, trembling with fear and clinging to her teacher. The police dog had been visiting the school as part of a community outreach program, and it had approached Emma gently, nuzzling her hand, offering comfort without a single command. It was a moment of pure trust, etched into the young girl's memory. The courtroom audience, now aware of the backstory, reacted with a mixture of amazement and warmth. Even the judge allowed a faint smile to cross his face, the sternness softened for a moment by the genuine human-animal connection on display. Lawyers whispered to one another, reporters scribbled furiously, and spectators exchanged awed glances. Cameras clicked repeatedly, capturing Emma's tiny hand pointing and the dog's gentle response. The scene was unfolding like a storybook illustration, a rare, unscripted interaction that bridged age, species, and circumstance. Emma's giggles echoed through the courtroom as she clapped her hands again. "Come here," she whispered softly, and the dog's eyes seemed to follow her, attentive yet disciplined. The K-9 officer maintained control, but he too was fascinated, witnessing firsthand the instinctual bond between his trained partner and a small, innocent child. He nodded slightly toward Emma, a silent acknowledgement of the remarkable connection. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted dramatically. Where tension and seriousness had once dominated, there was now curiosity, warmth, and a touch of wonder. Observers in the gallery were visibly moved. "It's incredible how she recognizes him," one woman whispered. "And the dog, he's responding," said another, eyes wide. Some speculated that the story would go viral. Others simply admired the display of trust and innocence. The dog's subtle wag of the tail, combined with Emma's delighted giggles, transformed a formal courtroom session into an unforgettable moment of shared humanity. Even hardened officers, who had seen countless children and animals in the line of duty, paused to watch, realizing that this scene was extraordinary. As the judge called the session to order, he allowed a brief pause, observing the unique interaction. The lawyer representing the case glanced at Emma, then at the dog, and shook his head with a smile. Reporters whispered, "We need to capture this, it's going to be big." For Emma, the courtroom had become more than a place of rules and seriousness. It was a space of recognition, safety, and joy. She continued to point at the dog, occasionally laughing and whispering in a voice full of delight and wonder. The K-9 officer finally stepped closer to the front of the room, allowing the dog to settle calmly at his side. Yet even in this controlled position, the dog's ears flicked repeatedly toward Emma, and its eyes maintained an unbroken gaze. Emma reached out, gently waving at the dog, and the canine responded with the slightest shift of posture, as though acknowledging a familiar friend. Cameras clicked again, capturing every second, every subtle gesture. The courtroom, once a place of tension and formalities, had been transformed by innocence, recognition, and the quiet magic of connection. Sarah held Emma close, whispering softly, "You remember him, don't you?" Emma's small hand patted the dog's invisible presence as she whispered excitedly. The gallery, the reporters, the lawyers, even the judge, all were witnesses to a rare, unspoken dialogue between child and canine. For everyone present it was clear. This was more than coincidence. It was memory, instinct, and trust made visible. The courtroom had become a stage for a moment of pure humanity, a story that would linger in the hearts of those who saw it, long after the gavel fell. By the time the session began to resume, the courtroom had shifted. The story of Emma and the police dog was already etched into everyone's mind. The officers relaxed slightly, the lawyers refocused, and the judge allowed proceedings to continue, though the warmth and curiosity lingered in the air. Emma's small hand remained pointed in quiet acknowledgement of the dog, a reminder to everyone present that even in places of authority and formality, innocence and connection could shine brightly, leaving a lasting impact on all who witnessed it. The courtroom settled into an unusual rhythm. Legal proceedings continued in a hushed, professional cadence, yet the presence of the police dog and the little girl pointing at it had shifted the energy in the room. Everyone, from the judge at the bench to the spectators in the gallery, found their attention drawn to the tiny child whose focus refused to waver. Emma's small hand remained raised, her finger pointing unwaveringly, her brown eyes fixed on the massive K-9 standing calmly beside its handler. Even the officers, accustomed to controlling courtroom order, couldn't help but glance at the pair repeatedly. Emma's voice finally broke through the silence, small but filled with certainty. "He's the brave one," she whispered again, this time louder, as if affirming to herself what her eyes had already declared. Her mother leaned closer, gently adjusting the child's stuffed bunny on her lap. "Do you know him, Emma?" she asked softly, curious yet cautious. Emma nodded vigorously, her curls bouncing slightly as she smiled. "He helped me," she said simply, her tone full of innocence and conviction. Sarah's eyes widened, memories flooding back. It had been months ago, a day etched into Sarah's memory. Emma, terrified of a sudden thunderstorm at preschool, had shrunk in fear, trembling as the thunder roared outside the windows. The preschool had called in a police K-9 unit for a community demonstration, not knowing that one dog in particular had a calm, gentle demeanor designed to comfort children. The dog had approached Emma quietly, nudging her tiny hand with a soft nuzzle, offering reassurance without a command. That moment of instinctual trust had stayed with Emma, and now, in the vast, formal courtroom, she remembered. The courtroom seemed to pause around her. Lawyers shifted in their seats, exchanging glances. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, capturing the scene with a mixture of awe and disbelief. A 3-year-old child recognizing a police dog in court. One whispered to another. "And the dog seems to respond. I've never seen anything like this," said another reporter, adjusting her camera to catch the moment. Even the judge allowed himself a brief smile. His stern expression softened as he watched Emma clap her hands softly, eyes sparkling with joy. The officer kneeling beside the dog noticed Emma's behavior carefully. His partner, a strong, disciplined K-9 named Rex, had been trained for years in detection, protection, and public interaction, but never had a moment like this unfolded so spontaneously. Rex's ears flicked, tail shifted slightly, and his posture softened, a subtle acknowledgement of recognition. The officer leaned down, whispering softly to his partner, maintaining control while silently marveling at the scene. He knew that in decades of service, few officers witnessed such a deep an instantaneous connection between their canine partner and a child. Emma's joy grew as she whispered a few words more, pointing insistently. "I remember you. You were there when I was scared," she said, her small voice carrying across the courtroom. Spectators leaned forward, curiosity rippling through the room. The audience could see the bond forming, subtle but undeniable, and there was a soft warmth spreading throughout the space. Emma's laughter, light and unrestrained, rang out like a bell in the otherwise formal room, softening tensions and drawing smiles from even the most stoic adults. Sarah, moved by the unfolding scene, shared the story quietly with those nearby. "Rex was at Emma's preschool months ago," she explained. "There was a sudden thunderstorm. Emma was terrified and he came over. He nudged her hand and just stayed with her until she calmed down." Observers nodded, their expressions shifting from curiosity to admiration. Some whispered that this display of recognition might be one of the most touching moments they had ever witnessed in a courtroom. Cameras clicked repeatedly, capturing Emma's tiny hand raised, her giggles, and the dog's subtle acknowledgement. The lawyers in the courtroom tried to maintain professional composure, but they couldn't entirely hide their fascination. One whispered to a colleague, "Look at that, the dog actually seems to recognize her, and she knows him. Incredible." Another muttered, "This is going to be a headline before noon." Even the officers present allowed themselves a moment of admiration, recognizing that while they dealt with training, enforcement, and security every day, moments of pure, instinctive connection were rare and precious. Emma's gestures became more animated. She leaned slightly forward on her mother's lap, pointing and whispering to Rex as if encouraging him. The dog responded subtly, shifting closer under the careful watch of his handler. His tail gave a slow, controlled wag, his ears flicked attentively, and his gaze never left Emma. To the untrained eye, it was a slight, professional movement. To those who understood canine behavior, it was unmistakable: recognition, trust, and the joy of a familiar presence. The child had called forth a response that few adults could ever evoke. The courtroom's atmosphere shifted further, no longer dominated by the seriousness of the trial. A sense of wonder spread among the spectators, and even the judge allowed a small, amused smile to linger. Cameras continued clicking, capturing every subtle movement: the tiny child pointing, the stuffed bunny in her other hand, the large police dog responding with disciplined yet affectionate recognition. Reporters whispered urgently to one another, nodding that this interaction could be the human interest story of the year. Emma's mother watched in awe, squeezing her daughter gently. "Do you remember everything?" she whispered. Emma nodded vigorously. "Yes, he kept me safe," she exclaimed, her words bright with certainty. Observers murmured softly, touched by the simplicity and power of her statement. For Emma, the courtroom had become less a place of intimidating adults and formal proceedings, and more a stage for reconnecting with a familiar, comforting presence. Her joy was contagious, infecting everyone in the room with warmth and a sense of shared humanity. The K-9 officer finally allowed Rex to shift closer to Emma, maintaining full control but permitting a safe, visible acknowledgement. The dog's eyes softened, tail moved slowly, and the disciplined posture remained tempered with subtle signs of recognition. Reporters scrambled to capture photographs and video, knowing that this was no ordinary courtroom moment. Emma continued clapping her hands and whispering, occasionally leaning forward to engage with Rex, her laughter soft but unmistakable. The gallery, officers, and even the judge observed in silent admiration, realizing that what they were witnessing was rare, intimate, and profoundly moving. Every subtle gesture, the child's pointing finger, the dog's attentive gaze, the officer's careful control, told a story without words. It was a story of trust, memory, and innocence surviving in a structured, adult world. The courtroom had transformed from a sterile environment of rules, schedules, and legal procedure into a living space where connection, compassion, and instinct could shine. Emma's recognition of the dog had become a powerful reminder that even in places of authority and formality, genuine emotion and unspoken bonds could emerge, leaving an indelible impression on everyone who witnessed it. As the session continued, the energy in the room remained altered. Lawyers returned to their notes, witnesses prepared for testimony, but the collective attention of the audience often drifted back to Emma and Rex. Each gesture, glance, or whisper between them commanded a subtle spotlight, keeping the room engaged. Even the judge occasionally glanced down, the faintest smile touching his lips as he acknowledged the unusual and remarkable scene unfolding at the heart of the courtroom. The trial might continue, but for everyone present, the story of a tiny girl recognizing a police dog had already captured their hearts. The courtroom's atmosphere had shifted completely. What had begun as a rigid, serious environment, dominated by formalities, papers, and protocols, now hummed with quiet fascination. Emma's tiny hand remained raised, her finger pointing firmly toward the massive police dog standing beside its handler. Her brown eyes sparkled with recognition, joy, and the delight of familiarity. Even the judge, known for his stoic demeanor, allowed a small, genuine smile to cross his face, as if he were silently acknowledging that this small child had brought something rare into the room: innocence, trust, and an unspoken connection that transcended age and circumstance. The K-9 officer had moved cautiously closer, aware of the child's comfort but also intent on maintaining strict control of his partner. "Do you want to say hello?" he asked Emma gently. The girl's eyes lit up, and she nodded so eagerly that her curls bounced with excitement. "Yes, please," she whispered, gripping her stuffed bunny tightly with her other hand. The officer knelt slightly, carefully allowing the dog, Rex, to shift closer, maintaining discipline while permitting the gentle acknowledgement Emma seemed to crave. Rex's eyes softened, ears flicking attentively. The massive canine's body, taught and trained, showed subtle signs of recognition: a slow wag of the tail, a gentle tilt of the head, and a calm yet alert posture. To anyone unfamiliar with police dogs, the gestures might seem small, but to those who understood the training and discipline involved, it was unmistakable. Rex knew her, remembered her, and acknowledged her presence without the need for commands or coaxing. Emma's tiny face broke into a wide smile, her hands clapping softly in delight. The gallery and spectators were captivated. Whispers ran through the room like a soft current. "Is she really familiar with the dog?" one woman asked, leaning closer to the person next to her. "Look at his ears," another whispered, eyes wide. "He's responding." Lawyers glanced at one another, intrigued yet trying to remain professional. Even the courtroom staff, who had seen hundreds of proceedings, couldn't hide their astonishment. Cameras clicked repeatedly, capturing every subtle gesture, every glance, every interaction. The story was unfolding in real time, a scene that felt almost cinematic, yet entirely real. Sarah, Emma's mother, held her daughter gently, whispering softly into her ear. "Do you remember him, sweetheart?" Emma's tiny nod was vigorous and decisive. "Yes, he kept me safe," she said, voice filled with absolute certainty. Memories of that earlier encounter at preschool surfaced clearly for Sarah. It had been a thunderstorm so sudden and loud that Emma had panicked, trembling in fear. Rex, the same police dog, had approached her calmly, nudging her hand gently, offering reassurance with his presence alone. That memory, buried for months, now emerged fully in her daughter's mind, visible to everyone in the room. The courtroom's energy softened further, now tinged with warmth and wonder. Emma leaned slightly forward on her mother's lap, speaking softly to Rex as if encouraging him to come closer. "I wasn't scared when you were there," she whispered. The dog, trained to respond to commands and signals from his handler, subtly shifted, moving slightly toward the small figure of Emma. It was a gesture small in movement but enormous in significance, a silent acknowledgement of trust and recognition. Even the officer guiding him seemed taken aback by the depth of the interaction, allowing a rare, subtle smile to form. Spectators could see the magic in the moment. The courtroom, which moments before had been dominated by tense focus on legal proceedings, had become a space of humanity and wonder. People whispered to each other, some commenting on the remarkable instinct of children, others noting the extraordinary intelligence and sensitivity of the K-9. "It's like they understand each other," a woman murmured, eyes soft. Yes, replied her companion, and he remembers her. Look at that connection. Cameras continued flashing, capturing a moment that few would ever forget. A story of instinct, memory, and emotional resonance unfolding in real time. The lawyers in the courtroom tried to focus on the trial at hand, but even they couldn't resist glancing at Emma and Rex. This is incredible, one whispered to his colleague, barely concealing admiration. A child this young recognizing a trained police dog, and the dog responds. Another muttered, I've never seen anything like this in my career. Even the officers present, who dealt daily with working K-9 units, paused to observe, nodding subtle signs of acknowledgement. The slow wag of the tail, the attentive gaze, the minimal but precise shift in posture. These were indicators of recognition that spoke louder than words ever could. Emma's delight continued to grow. She leaned forward slightly, tiny hands clapping together, her voice occasionally rising in giggles. Come closer, please, she whispered softly. Rex's ears flicked again, and his tail moved gently in rhythm with the child's excitement. To the casual observer, the movements were restrained and professional, yet anyone attuned to the relationship between a child and a dog recognized the unmistakable signs: acknowledgement, trust, and an instinctive joy at seeing someone familiar. Emma's innocent laughter created a ripple effect, softening the tension in the courtroom and drawing smiles from every corner. Sarah held her daughter close, whispering a gentle reassurance. It's okay, honey, he remembers you. Emma beamed up at her mother, gripping her stuffed bunny and turning her gaze once more to Rex. He did, he remembered, she whispered proudly, her voice full of wonder and certainty. The judge, observing from his elevated position, allowed a faint smile to linger, acknowledging the rare and human moment that had unfolded in his courtroom. The room, despite its formal setting, had been transformed into a space where innocence, trust, and recognition could coexist with law and order. Observers in the gallery whispered among themselves, sharing astonishment and delight. Look at the way he's responding, one said. And she's not afraid, another added. The scene resonated deeply. A child's memory and innocence interacting seamlessly with a trained, disciplined police dog in a controlled environment. Cameras clicked, reporters whispered, and spectators exchanged quiet smiles. Emma's gestures, pointing, clapping, and leaning forward, combined with Rex's subtle acknowledgement, created a tableau that was both heartwarming and extraordinary. The K-9 officer continued to monitor Rex, ensuring safety and control, but he too allowed himself to notice the profound connection. This is rare, he whispered quietly to another officer. You don't often see this level of recognition from a child. The courtroom's professional focus remained, but it was interspersed with moments of quiet attention to the extraordinary bond unfolding at the center of the room. Emma's laughter, soft words, and gestures had created a ripple of warmth that reached everyone present. By the time the proceedings began to move forward, Emma and Rex had formed a subtle but undeniable connection. The dog remained disciplined, professional, but his attention never strayed from the tiny figure who had recognized him with such certainty. Emma, in turn, remained fully engaged, her finger pointing intermittently, her eyes locked on the familiar presence, her laughter and whispers punctuating the formalities of the courtroom. The gallery, the officers, the judge, and even the reporters could sense that they were witnessing something extraordinary. A bond born of instinct, memory, and trust, unfolding quietly but profoundly in the center of the legal stage. As the first hour of proceedings ended, Sarah held Emma close, smiling down at her daughter. You made a friend, she whispered. Emma's small face lit up with pride and joy. She waved a tiny hand toward Rex, who responded with a slight tilt of his head, a gentle wag of the tail, and eyes that seemed almost to twinkle. Cameras captured the interaction, and whispers ran through the courtroom. The moment had become more than a child recognizing a dog. It was a symbol of innocence, trust, and the quiet but profound connections that could exist even in the most formal of places. The courtroom had been transformed. What had begun as a session filled with tension, seriousness, and rigid formality now carried a subtle warmth. Emma's recognition of Rex had created a ripple of humanity throughout the room. Lawyers, officers, the judge, reporters, and spectators all found themselves captivated, reminded of the rare moments of connection that could transcend age, training, and circumstance. The session would continue, but everyone present knew that the memory of a tiny girl pointing at a police dog, the dog acknowledging her in subtle but unmistakable ways, and the quiet joy and innocence in the room would linger long after the gavel fell. The courtroom had shifted from a place of strict formality to something almost magical. Emma's small hands clapped softly, her tiny feet tapping gently against the bench as her eyes remained locked on the massive police dog, Rex. The K-9 officer at his side had maintained control, but even he couldn't hide the subtle pride in his expression. The dog's ears twitched slightly, tail wagging in a slow, deliberate rhythm, and his eyes held a softness rarely witnessed in such a controlled environment. Everyone present sensed something extraordinary: a trained officer and a 3-year-old child, connected by a bond beyond explanation. Emma's excitement grew in waves. She leaned forward, softly whispering to Rex, urging him with her words, "Come closer, it's okay, you can come." The dog, trained for discipline and control, shifted a small step toward her, acknowledging her presence in the gentlest possible way. It was a tiny motion, but in that room, under the scrutiny of dozens of adults, it carried enormous meaning. Emma clapped her hands and giggled, the sound pure and infectious, drawing smiles from the stiffest faces in the courtroom. Sarah, holding her daughter on her lap, whispered softly, "Do you remember everything, sweetie?" Emma nodded eagerly, curls bouncing. "Yes, he helped me. He made me safe when I was scared." The memories of that day at preschool had long been buried, yet here they surfaced vividly. Rex had been part of a community outreach program, visiting schools to demonstrate the calm authority of trained police dogs. When Emma had panicked during a sudden thunderstorm, he had instinctively approached, nudging her small hand with gentle reassurance. The moment had stayed lodged in her memory, and now, in a place as formal and serious as a courtroom, it resurfaced perfectly. Observers in the gallery whispered among themselves, captivated by the scene. "Look at her face, she trusts him completely," one woman murmured. "And the dog, he's responding to her," replied another, eyes wide. Even the lawyers, who often prided themselves on composure, leaned back in their chairs, quietly observing. Cameras clicked, capturing every gesture: the tiny pointing finger, the gentle wag of the dog's tail, and the sparkle of recognition in Emma's eyes. The story unfolding was no longer just a courtroom proceeding. It was a living tableau of trust, memory, and connection. The K-9 officer, maintaining a careful watch, allowed Rex to move slightly closer. "Good boy," he murmured under his breath, as though sharing the secret of the dog's training with the world. Rex shifted deliberately, a subtle but unmistakable acknowledgement, careful not to overstep boundaries while still responding to Emma's energy. Emma's face lit up brighter than ever. She leaned forward slightly, gently waving her hands, inviting the dog to come near, and the canine responded with cautious steps. To anyone watching, it was a testament to the extraordinary intelligence and empathy of a trained police dog, and to the unshakable innocence and trust of a 3-year-old child. The gallery's whispers grew louder, a soft murmur of astonishment and admiration spreading through the room. "I've never seen anything like this," one visitor said. "It's incredible how he knows her," another replied, eyes glistening. Even the judge allowed a faint, approving smile, the kind that comes only when witnessing something truly rare. Lawyers jotted down notes, some pausing to take discreet photographs. Reporters whispered urgently, realizing that this was more than a human interest story. It had the potential to go viral, a moment of emotional resonance that could capture hearts far beyond the courtroom walls. Emma's laughter, soft yet infectious, echoed through the chamber. "Good boy, yes, you're so brave," she exclaimed, clapping her hands repeatedly. Rex responded with a subtle wag of his tail, shifting slightly closer under the careful guidance of his handler. The dog's eyes, intelligent and calm, locked on Emma, almost as if acknowledging the tiny girl's delight and trust. The K-9 officer, watching closely, allowed himself a quiet nod. Moments like this, pure, instinctive connection between child and K-9, were exceedingly rare, and he silently marveled at the interplay of memory, training, and trust unfolding before him. Sarah's voice trembled slightly as she whispered encouragement to Emma. "It's okay, honey. He's here. He remembers you." Emma giggled, eyes wide with joy, and leaned slightly closer, waving her small hand. The dog responded, tail swaying gently, head tilting slightly, ears flicking attentively. Every subtle gesture between them spoke volumes: recognition, reassurance, and a bond that transcended human language. The courtroom, usually dominated by tension and formality, had become a space of warmth, trust, and shared awe. Spectators watched quietly, their attention fully captured by the unfolding connection. The officers at the front, hardened by years of service and countless courtroom appearances, couldn't help but smile. "Look at him," one murmured. "He's responding instinctively, and she's fearless." Another nodded, recognizing the rare moment of trust that even adult witnesses rarely evoked. Cameras continued flashing, capturing every subtle interaction. The tiny girl's innocent gestures, combined with the dog's gentle acknowledgement, created a scene of warmth, humanity, and subtle drama that no legal proceeding alone could have produced. Lawyers attempted to regain focus on the case at hand, but even they found themselves stealing glances at Emma and Rex. One whispered to a colleague, "She's not just recognizing him, he's responding to her energy. Incredible." Another muttered, "I've seen hundreds of K-9 interactions, but never like this." Even the judge, resuming the reading of the next motion, couldn't help but watch with one eye, the smile never fading completely. The courtroom's tone had shifted irreversibly. Formalities continued, but awe and wonder lingered at the edges of every observer's mind. Emma, oblivious to the attention she was attracting, continued clapping, giggling, and whispering to Rex. "Good boy, you're so brave," she said, leaning slightly forward, her tiny hands raised in excitement. Rex responded, shifting slightly closer again, ears flicking, tail wagging ever so subtly. The officer allowed the interaction, careful but attentive, knowing this bond was rare and fragile, built of instinct, memory, and genuine affection. Observers could see that Emma was not afraid. Her energy radiated trust, drawing even the disciplined K-9 into subtle acknowledgement of her presence. Sarah's voice was soft but full of awe. "He remembers you, Emma. You were safe with him before, and he knows it." Emma's small hands patted the space near her, almost inviting the dog closer, her gaze unwavering. The gallery leaned forward collectively, murmuring admiration and disbelief. "It's amazing," one whispered. "Look at the connection," said another. The courtroom had transformed into a living display of trust, innocence, and instinct, a moment that would linger in the minds of all who witnessed it for years to come. The dog's subtle gestures became more pronounced yet controlled, a slight tilt of the head, a tiny wag of the tail, and careful positioning near Emma without breaking discipline. Every movement communicated recognition and calm reassurance. Emma's excitement reached its peak. She clapped, giggled, and whispered words of encouragement repeatedly. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled, and spectators sighed quietly, as if witnessing a miracle unfold in real time. The courtroom, tense only moments ago, had become a stage for something profoundly human and deeply moving. Even as the session continued, with lawyers presenting evidence and the judge calling witnesses, Emma's bond with Rex remained the focal point. Each subtle interaction, small hand gestures, gentle giggles, and the dog's disciplined acknowledgement commanded attention. The gallery, officers, and courtroom staff remained captivated. A formal legal setting had been momentarily transformed into a space where innocence, trust, and the instinctual intelligence of a canine, reminded everyone present of the extraordinary connections that exist beyond words and rules. As the first half of the session ended, Emma leaned slightly back, her hands clapping, her eyes still locked on Rex. The dog remained alert, disciplined, yet softened subtly, allowing the tiny human's recognition to resonate. Sarah held her daughter gently, whispering softly, "You've made a friend today, Emma." The little girl beamed, her curls bouncing, her gaze never leaving the canine. Cameras captured the moment. Whispers of admiration filled the gallery, and even the judge's stern expression held a soft smile. The courtroom had witnessed something rare, beautiful, and unforgettable. A tiny girl and a police dog, connected by trust, memory, and instinct. The courtroom's atmosphere had transformed entirely. What began as a rigid environment of formalities and legal proceedings now hummed with awe and quiet wonder. Emma sat on her mother's lap, her small hand still raised, finger pointing insistently toward Rex, the police dog. The massive canine, disciplined and trained, responded with subtle gestures, a gentle tilt of the head, a slow wag of the tail, eyes softening with recognition. Every movement, no matter how small, was magnified in meaning by the sheer innocence and certainty of the child's focus. Sarah held Emma closer, her voice soft and trembling with awe. "He remembers you, sweetheart," she whispered. Emma's curls bounced as she nodded vigorously. "Yes, he's the brave one," she said, clapping her tiny hands, her excitement radiating like sunlight in the tense courtroom. Spectators watched quietly, their own attention pulled irresistibly toward the unlikely pair. Even the judge, returning to the procedural elements of the case, occasionally tilted his head, a faint smile lingering, fully aware that this small girl and the police dog had captured the entire room's attention. Reporters began taking discreet notes, some whispering to one another, others adjusting cameras to capture every subtle gesture. "This is extraordinary," one whispered, voice hushed but eager. "A 3-year-old recognizes a trained canine and the dog is responding. It's going to be a viral story before noon." Another reporter nodded, eyes wide, as the camera lens focused on Emma's tiny hand pointing and the dog's careful acknowledgement. The courtroom, previously dominated by the sound of papers rustling and pens scratching, now resonated with whispers of awe and quiet admiration. Lawyers, usually preoccupied with evidence, motions, and legal strategy, couldn't entirely suppress their fascination. One leaned toward a colleague and whispered, "Look at how the dog responds to her energy. It's instinctual." Another replied, "She's not afraid. She trusts him completely. Incredible." The K-9 officer, who had seen countless children interact with his trained dog, allowed a subtle smile, recognizing that this interaction was rare, perhaps unprecedented in his decades of experience. Rex's body language, carefully controlled yet undeniably affectionate, spoke volumes of recognition and trust. Emma's laughter, light and unrestrained, echoed gently through the courtroom. She leaned forward slightly, whispering words of encouragement to Rex. "Good boy, you're brave. You're so strong." Each word seemed to energize the dog, who responded with slight shifts, careful wagging of his tail and attentive glances. Sarah felt her heart swell as she watched her daughter engage with a being so much larger and stronger than herself, yet so gentle and responsive. The scene was a testament to the extraordinary bond between humans and animals, especially when built on trust and shared experience. Spectators began exchanging quiet smiles and murmurs of admiration. "It's incredible how they understand each other," whispered one. "And look at how calm he is around her," replied another. The gallery, filled with families, lawyers, and reporters, collectively felt the warmth of the moment. Even hardened officers, accustomed to courtroom decorum and the disciplined nature of K-9 units, softened their posture, leaning forward just slightly to witness the delicate connection. Cameras clicked repeatedly, preserving every small gesture. The pointing finger, the gentle clapping of tiny hands, the soft wag of the tail. The judge cleared his throat gently, attempting to resume the session, yet his stern gaze was softened by the warmth of the room. He adjusted his glasses but allowed the proceedings to continue at a slightly slower pace, granting a subtle, unspoken acknowledgement of the extraordinary human-animal connection taking place. Witnesses preparing to testify paused for a moment, their attention drawn to Emma and Rex. Even in a space dominated by rules, protocol, and the gravity of legal matters, this display of innocence and recognition held the room spellbound. The K-9 officer allowed Rex to move slightly closer, still under careful control. The massive dog, trained to respond to commands above all else, now exhibited small, subtle signs of comfort and recognition, ears flicking attentively, tail wagging in a slow, rhythmic motion and body posture softening without compromising discipline. Emma, oblivious to the formalities around her, clapped her hands again, giggling and whispering, "Good boy, you remember me." "Yes." The energy between the two created a ripple that spread through the courtroom, softening even the most serious faces. Sarah whispered softly to her daughter, "You've made a friend today, Emma. He remembers you just like you remembered him." Emma's face lit up in delight, and she waved her small hand toward Rex. The dog responded with the slightest movement closer, head tilting ever so gently, eyes maintaining contact. Spectators noted the extraordinary subtlety of the interaction. Nothing flashy, no breaking of discipline, yet every nuance communicated understanding, recognition, and trust. Reporters scrambled quietly, realizing that this story was more than local news. The scene, a 3-year-old recognizing a trained police dog in a courtroom, the dog responding with subtle gestures, had the potential to capture hearts nationwide. Phones discreetly recorded snippets, cameras clicked, and whispers of admiration echoed. "This is the story people need to hear," one reporter murmured. "It's about trust, memory, and connection, not just a courtroom proceeding." The courtroom continued its business, but Emma and Rex remained the focal point. Lawyers occasionally stole glances, spectators leaned forward, and even the judge allowed a few more smiles to surface, acknowledging the rare warmth in the room. Emma's gestures became slightly more animated, clapping softly, whispering words of encouragement, and occasionally leaning closer. Rex's subtle responses mirrored her energy, a dance of recognition and trust unfolding quietly but powerfully. The emotional resonance spread further as Emma whispered, "I wasn't scared when you were there before. You helped me." Sarah's eyes glistened with tears. The gallery felt the weight of the sentiment, a child's memory, her innocence, and a dog's instinctual recognition intersecting in a place of law and order. Observers, from reporters to courtroom staff, recognized the rarity of the moment. The bond on display transcended words, leaving an impression that would linger far beyond the walls of the courtroom. Even the K-9 officer allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. "Moments like this," he whispered quietly to a colleague, "remind you why you do this job. Trust, instinct, connection. This is why we train them the way we do." The subtle gestures of the dog and the child's unwavering recognition highlighted the culmination of trust, training, and instinct, creating a scene both heartwarming and extraordinary. Emma continued clapping softly, whispering, "Good boy, you're brave, you remember me." Rex's body language remained subtle but unmistakable, tail wagging, ears alert, head tilting. The courtroom, despite the formal proceedings continuing around them, held its breath at the quiet power of the interaction. Spectators whispered, exchanged smiles, and occasionally dabbed eyes at the emotional resonance of what they were witnessing. Cameras clicked, reporters murmured, and even the judge, returning to legal matters, occasionally glanced at the pair, a faint smile lingering. As the session neared a short recess, Sarah held Emma close, whispering, "He'll always remember you." Emma smiled widely, eyes still shining, and waved a small hand toward Rex, who responded subtly, his massive form shifting carefully closer. Reporters took one last round of photos. Murmurs of admiration and astonishment filled the air, and spectators quietly reflected on the rare display of innocence, trust, and emotional resonance that had unfolded before them. The ripple effect was clear. This wasn't just a courtroom moment. It was a story of memory, recognition, and trust, of a child and a dog connecting across time and circumstance. The impact extended beyond those present. Reporters knew it would travel far, inspiring readers, viewers, and anyone who saw the images of a tiny girl and a massive police dog sharing an unspoken bond. For Emma, the courtroom was no longer a place of intimidating authority. It was a space of comfort, recognition, and joy. For Rex, the disciplined K9, it was a subtle acknowledgement of a familiar friend, and for everyone else, it was a rare moment that reminded them of the power of trust, memory, and human-animal connection. The courtroom had become a stage for something extraordinary. Emma, her tiny hand still pointing, sat perched on her mother's lap, curls bouncing with each subtle movement of excitement. Every eye in the room, from the judge on his elevated bench to the last spectator in the gallery, was drawn to the tiny girl and the massive police dog, Rex, who now stood just a few feet away. His massive frame, usually commanding and disciplined, softened in response to the child's presence, subtle gestures signaling recognition and trust. The air itself seemed to hum with anticipation, a quiet awe that hung over the proceedings like an invisible veil. Sarah gently adjusted Emma on her lap, whispering, "Do you remember him, honey?" Emma's wide brown eyes gleamed, and she nodded with certainty. "Yes, he helped me. He made me feel safe." Her words, innocent yet full of authority for her age, resonated throughout the courtroom. Every person present understood the weight of a child so small speaking with absolute certainty about a dog's impact on her life. It was a moment rare and profound, the kind that would linger in the memory of anyone who witnessed it. The K9 officer, ever watchful, allowed Rex to take a small, careful step closer. The massive dog's ears flicked, tail moved in a slow, deliberate rhythm, and his eyes fixed gently on Emma. The movement was subtle, restrained by years of training, yet it carried meaning that transcended words. Observers in the gallery whispered to each other, some with awe, others with tears glistening in their eyes. "Look at that connection," one woman murmured softly. "It's like they can speak without words," replied another, equally captivated. Emma giggled softly, clapping her hands in delight. "Come closer, please. You can come," she whispered, leaning forward slightly. Rex responded with a subtle shift, moving closer under the careful supervision of his handler. The officer allowed the gesture, knowing that such a rare interaction could not be forced. It had to be mutual, born of trust and recognition. Emma's excitement radiated through the courtroom, breaking down the usual walls of protocol and tension that had dominated the room before. Reporters quietly adjusted their cameras, capturing the unfolding scene. "This is extraordinary," one whispered to another. A 3-year-old child recognizing a trained police dog in a courtroom, and the dog responding, "It's beyond rare. It's incredible." Another nodded, scribbling notes with barely concealed excitement. Every gesture, the tiny finger pointing, the gentle clapping, the soft whispers from Emma, the subtle shift of Rex's massive body, was amplified in significance by the hushed attention of dozens of observers. The courtroom had been transformed into a theater of recognition, trust, and wonder. Even the lawyers, who prided themselves on focus and composure, leaned slightly forward, unable to resist the scene before them. "I've never seen anything like this," one whispered to his colleague, eyes wide. "The dog's acknowledging her in a subtle but unmistakable way, and she's not afraid, she trusts him completely." The judge, returning briefly to procedural matters, allowed a faint smile to linger on his face, recognizing the rare humanity on display amidst the legal formalities. Every participant understood that this interaction, small yet profound, had captured the heart of the courtroom. Emma's gestures became more expressive. She leaned forward, waving her small hand gently, whispering encouragement to Rex. "Good boy, you remember me. Yes, you're brave." Her words, though quiet, carried a power that resonated throughout the chamber. The dog, disciplined yet responsive, allowed a slight wag of the tail, subtle tilts of his head, and an attentive gaze that never left the child. The officer supervising Rex allowed the movement, carefully monitoring, but also marveling at the rare display of instinctual recognition and trust. Spectators whispered among themselves, their awe growing. "It's amazing," one murmured. "Look at how the dog responds without a command. He knows her." Another added, "And she's so small, yet there's no fear, just trust." The gallery, filled with families, reporters, and courtroom staff, collectively absorbed the emotion, sharing a sense of wonder that transcended the ordinary proceedings. Cameras clicked continuously, capturing every nuance. The child's pointing finger, the subtle movements of the dog, the excitement and delight radiating from both. Sarah's voice trembled slightly as she whispered to her daughter, "He's your friend, Emma. You were safe with him before, and he remembers you." Emma's eyes shone with joy as she clapped her hands again, giggling softly. She leaned closer, her tiny fingers twitching in excitement as if to beckon Rex even nearer. The dog responded with careful steps, maintaining discipline while acknowledging the child's presence. Every subtle motion between them communicated recognition, reassurance, and the quiet joy of reunion. Even hardened officers present in the courtroom softened, watching the interaction unfold. "I've trained dogs for years," one whispered quietly, "but I've never seen one respond like that to a child's instinct alone." Another nodded, eyes fixed on Rex and Emma. "It's rare, almost miraculous. Look at the attention and trust, it's instinctual." Reporters continued clicking cameras and taking notes, sensing that this interaction would become a story shared far beyond the courtroom walls. A story about trust, recognition, and the extraordinary bond between a child and a dog. Emma's excitement peaked. She clapped her hands, leaned forward, and whispered once more, "Good boy, you remembered me, yes." Rex's tail wagged slightly, ears flicked attentively, and his head tilted as he focused fully on the tiny girl. The subtle movements, restrained yet unmistakable, held the entire courtroom's attention. The judge, observing from above, allowed a faint smile to linger. Lawyers, spectators, and reporters all leaned slightly forward, captivated by the rare display of trust and recognition between child and canine. Sarah held her daughter tightly, whispering, "You've made a friend today, honey." Emma's curls bounced as she beamed, eyes locked on Rex. The officer supervising the canine allowed a small, proud nod. Moments like this pure, instinctive connection between a child and a trained dog were rare and profound, and they unfolded in silence, visible to everyone in the room. The courtroom had been transformed from a formal chamber of law to a space where recognition, trust, and innocence could flourish. Spectators whispered softly, some dabbing eyes, others simply observing in awe. "It's beautiful," one woman said quietly. "Look at how they understand each other," replied another. Cameras continued flashing, capturing the pointing finger, the subtle tail wag, the tiny giggles, and the gentle nods of recognition. Every person present sensed the magnitude of the moment. A 3-year-old and a police dog, united by memory and trust, commanding attention without breaking the disciplined boundaries of the courtroom. Even as the legal proceedings resumed, the focus on Emma and Rex persisted. Lawyers, officers, and the gallery occasionally stole glances, captivated by the subtle but powerful connection. Emma clapped softly, whispered encouragement, and waved her small hand, while Rex maintained gentle attentiveness, responding without overt movement, restrained but unmistakable. The courtroom had become a theater of trust, recognition, and emotional resonance, demonstrating that even in spaces of strict formality, innocence and instinct could create unforgettable moments. As the session reached a brief recess, Sarah held Emma close, whispering, "He remembers you. You're safe." Emma's small hand waved toward Rex, who responded with a slight shift, ears flicking attentively, tail wagging just enough to convey acknowledgement. The courtroom murmured softly, cameras captured every motion, and reporters whispered in anticipation of sharing the story far beyond the walls. The ripple effect was clear. This interaction, small but profound, had left an indelible impression on every observer. Emma and Rex had become the centerpiece of attention, their bond commanding the hearts of all present. The child's innocence, joy, and trust intertwined with the dog's intelligence, discipline, and subtle affection to create a rare tableau of humanity and instinct. Observers whispered, smiled, and quietly reflected on the magnitude of the moment. The courtroom, once rigid and formal, had been transformed into a space where innocence, memory, and trust could shine, leaving a lasting impression that would resonate far beyond the day's proceedings. The courtroom was quieter now, though the sense of awe lingered like a warm, unbroken thread. Emma, still on her mother's lap, had calmed slightly, but her small hand remained raised, gently pointing toward Rex. The massive police dog, disciplined and trained to respond to commands above all else, now stood just a few feet away, softening in subtle acknowledgement of the child. His tail swayed slowly, ears flicking attentively, and his gaze remained locked on Emma. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a recognition that transcended language, age, and circumstance. Sarah watched her daughter with a mixture of pride, relief, and wonder. She whispered softly, "He remembers you, honey. You were safe with him before, and he knows it now." Emma's brown eyes sparkled, her small face lighting up with a grin that radiated joy and confidence. "Yes, he helped me. He kept me safe," she whispered almost to herself, her words carrying the pure innocence of a 3-year-old who had experienced trust in its most profound form. Even in a room full of adults, her certainty commanded attention. The courtroom spectators, from reporters to family members, from officers to legal staff, remained entranced. Cameras clicked quietly, and whispered admiration ran through the room. "It's extraordinary," murmured a reporter, jotting down notes. "A child and a trained police dog forming a connection like this, it's beyond remarkable." Another added softly, "The trust, the recognition, I've never seen anything like it. It's human and animal instinct meeting in perfect harmony." Even the judge, reviewing his papers, allowed a faint smile to linger, a rare warmth crossing his stern features. The K-9 officer supervising Rex knelt slightly, whispering reassurances to the dog while maintaining control. Rex shifted subtly, stepping closer to Emma under careful guidance, signaling trust and recognition without breaking the disciplined stance that defined his training. The subtle movements of the massive canine, paired with the child's gestures and gentle whispers, created a silent conversation between two beings from completely different worlds, yet bound by instinct and memory. The observers could sense it, feel it, and witness the rare magic of connection unfolding in real time. Emma's laughter returned, soft and contagious. She clapped her tiny hands and whispered once more, "Good boy, you remembered me, yes." Rex responded subtly, tail wagging in a slow, controlled rhythm, ears flicking attentively, head tilting slightly. The officers, spectators, and reporters realized that every movement, every gesture carried meaning, recognition, reassurance, trust. The courtroom, though still formally in session, had become a space filled with warmth, humanity, and awe. Sarah held her daughter gently, whispering encouragement. "You've made a friend today, Emma. He remembers you. He knows you're safe." Emma's curls bounced as she leaned slightly toward Rex, waving a small hand. The dog responded with a careful shift, moving slightly closer under the officer's watchful eye. The interaction was delicate but profound. It required no words, only instinct, memory, and mutual trust. The gallery leaned in collectively, silently witnessing one of those rare moments that left a lasting impression on all who were present. The lawyers, now fully captivated, paused in their notes and discussions. "Look at the bond," one whispered to a colleague, voice hushed but full of admiration. "She trusts him completely and he's responding instinctively. It's incredible." Another replied softly, "I've seen hundreds of K-9 interactions, but none quite like this. It's almost magical." Even the judge, a figure usually defined by stern authority, glanced down from his bench, letting a faint smile linger as he observed the tiny girl and the massive dog communicate without words. Emma's excitement grew again. She clapped, leaned forward slightly, and whispered softly, "You're brave, you helped me, I remember you." Rex responded in kind, careful steps closer, a slow wag of his tail, ears alert but relaxed, eyes fixed tenderly on the child. The subtle interplay of gestures, laughter, and recognition captivated the courtroom entirely. Witnesses paused in their movements, spectators leaned forward, and even officers momentarily allowed their professional vigilance to give way to admiration. Cameras captured every nuance: the pointing finger, the tiny hands clapping, the slight wag of the tail, each frame preserving the memory of a rare bond. The ripple effect of Emma and Rex's connection spread beyond the courtroom walls. Reporters whispered excitedly to each other, scribbling notes furiously. "This isn't just a human interest story," one murmured. "It's about instinct, trust, memory. It's going to inspire people everywhere." Another nodded, adjusting a camera to focus on the child and the dog. "The images alone, people will see this and feel something real, something pure." Social media, news outlets, and family networks would soon carry the story. But in the room, the moment remained intimate, tangible, and emotionally powerful. Even hardened officers who had seen countless K-9 demonstrations paused to reflect. "Look at how he responds," one whispered quietly. "It's instinctual, it's recognition, not training alone, and she trusts him completely." Another nodded, gazing at the dog's careful, controlled steps and attentive posture. The bond was clear: a child's memory meeting a canine's instinct, creating a connection that transcended words and formalities. Every subtle shift and glance communicated trust, safety, and affection. Emma's excitement softened slightly, though her small hand remained raised, her finger pointing gently at Rex. She whispered, "I remember you. You helped me." The dog responded with the gentlest wag, ears flicking, a subtle nuzzle toward the air near her hand. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, watching her daughter engage in this rare, tender interaction. The courtroom collectively felt the weight of the moment. Innocence, trust, and memory bridging the gap between child and trained animal, creating something beautiful and unforgettable. The judge called for a brief recess, but the attention on Emma and Rex didn't waver. Spectators whispered softly, some leaning forward to capture one last glance, others reflecting silently on the scene. Cameras continued flashing discreetly, reporters murmured, and lawyers occasionally glanced at the pair, still captivated by the bond unfolding before them. It wasn't just a courtroom story. It was a story of humanity, trust, and the extraordinary connections that can exist across species and circumstance. Sarah held Emma close as the little girl continued softly whispering to Rex, "You're brave, you helped me, I remember." The dog, massive and disciplined, responded with the tiniest shifts, gentle ear flicks, and a tail that wagged slowly, carefully. Every subtle gesture carried meaning, and every observer could feel the unspoken bond that connected them. The courtroom, often a place of tension, authority, and strict rules, had become a space of warmth, understanding, and awe. Emma's laughter, soft and musical, echoed once more. She leaned slightly forward, clapping her tiny hands, whispering again, "Good boy, you remembered me." "Yes." Rex responded subtly, shifting closer under the watchful guidance of the K-9 officer. The entire room seemed to exhale collectively, sharing in the rare emotional resonance of the moment. Witnesses, spectators, reporters, and courtroom staff alike were quietly captivated, understanding that they had witnessed something extraordinary, a connection that defied age, size, and circumstance. As the session concluded for the day, Sarah lifted Emma slightly in her arms. The little girl waved one final tiny hand toward Rex, who responded with a careful step closer and attentive gaze, ears flicking gently. Cameras captured the moment. Whispers of admiration ran through the room, and even the judge allowed a warm, approving smile. The courtroom had been transformed. What began as a legal proceeding had become a stage for trust, memory, and the undeniable bond between a child and a police dog. Emma, resting her small head against her mother's shoulder, whispered softly, "He remembers me. He's my brave friend." Sarah smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, he remembers. You're safe." The officers, lawyers, and spectators quietly acknowledged the moment, understanding its rarity and significance. Reporters filed notes, aware that this story of recognition and trust would resonate far beyond the courtroom. Cameras had preserved the gestures, the tiny claps, the wagging tail, and the quiet but profound communication between Emma and Rex. Rex, ever disciplined yet instinctively responsive, remained close, ears alert, tail wagging subtly, maintaining gentle acknowledgement of the child who had remembered him. The bond, formed months ago during a frightened moment at preschool, had resurfaced perfectly in the courtroom. Emma's innocence, memory, and trust combined with Rex's intelligence, training, and instinct created a moment that none present would ever forget. The courtroom had witnessed a rare miracle, connection across species, age, and circumstance. As the courtroom emptied, whispers of admiration followed the departing spectators. "I've never seen anything like that," one said quietly. "It's beautiful, pure, and simple." Another added, "The way they understood each other, it's unforgettable." Emma waved once more to Rex before leaving, a small smile lighting up her face, and the dog responded with a subtle nod of acknowledgement. The memory of that day, the tiny girl pointing at the dog recognizing her instinctively, the smiles, giggles, and gentle gestures, would live on in the minds of all who had witnessed it.